My parents gave my sister everything, while I worked multiple jobs just to survive. Then my aunt found me and revealed the horrifying truth they had hidden for years. They never told you who the real heir was, did they? 2 days later, my parents called in a panic. "Please come home, we need you." Too late. My name is Nia. I am 28 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful private chef and owner of a luxury catering company, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching. Growing up in Atlanta meant prestige and megachurch politics to outsiders. But inside our sprawling estate, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our house was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight grades, yet I was always the disappointment. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low hum of live jazz filled the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Atlanta. It was the highly anticipated 30th anniversary banquet of my father's megachurch, a lavish affair meant to showcase his spiritual and financial dominion over the entire city. Pastor Desmond. My father sat at the center of the VIP table, soaking in the admiration of the city's black elite. I was not sitting at that table. I was standing behind the heavy swinging doors of the service kitchen, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. My catering company had been hired to provide the five-course meal for the evening. It was a massive contract, one that my family assumed I was desperate to get. They actually thought they were doing me a massive favor by letting my staff serve their wealthy guests. The real truth was my company catered for billionaires, and I only took this job because my stepmother Vivian had guilt-tripped me for a solid month about family loyalty and community image. I adjusted my pristine white chef coat and watched the dining floor. My staff moved with absolute military precision, serving hot plates of pan-seared sea bass and rich truffle risotto. Everything was flawless, until I saw my older sister Kendra stand up from her seat next to my father. Kendra was 30 years old, a former Spelman pageant queen and the undisputed golden child of our family. She wore a custom emerald green gown that hugged her curves perfectly, her hair styled in flawless cascading waves. She tapped her manicured fingernail against her crystal glass, deliberately demanding the immediate attention of everyone at the VIP table and the surrounding church elders. "Nia, get out here right now." Kendra's voice rang out sharp and commanding, completely shattering the elegant atmosphere. The polite chatter at the surrounding tables died down instantly. Church deacons, local politicians, and wealthy socialites turned their heads toward the kitchen doors. I took a deep breath, pasted on a professional smile, and pushed through the doors. I walked over to the VIP table, keeping my posture completely straight. "Is there an issue with the service, Kendra?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and measured. Kendra scoffed, picking up a crisp, folded piece of paper from the table. It was the catering invoice I had sent to the church administration earlier that week. The total was exactly $25,000. Kendra did not hand it to me politely. She threw it. The heavy cardstock fluttered through the air and hit my chest before landing on the floor near my shoes. "Mom and Dad paid for you to drop out of Clark Atlanta just so you could serve us hors d'oeuvres." Kendra laughed loudly, looking around the table to gather approving smirks from her friends. "Pay your own invoice, Nia. Consider it back pay for the expensive roof they kept over your head all those years." The blatant public disrespect hit me like a physical blow. I looked down at the invoice on the floor, then up at my father. Pastor Desmond took a slow sip of his sparkling water, deliberately refusing to meet my eyes. He was letting this happen. He always let this happen. "Vivian." My stepmother leaned forward in her seat. She adjusted the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, a stunning piece I knew cost more than my entire first year of culinary school. "Do not be ungrateful, Nia." Vivian chided, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. "We took you in, we clothed you. We even bought you that beat-up Honda so you could work your 3 little jobs, did we not? You should be thanking us for allowing your little catering hobby to be part of such a prestigious night." The sheer audacity of her lie made my blood boil. The wealthy church donors at the neighboring tables were watching me with deep pity, whispering behind their hands. They were buying the exact narrative Vivian was selling, the tragic story of the rebellious, ungrateful stepdaughter who simply could not make anything of herself despite a good home. I did not shrink away into the shadows. I stepped closer to the table, my voice carrying clearly across the completely silent room. I bought that Honda with my own tips, Vivian. I worked overnight shifts at a dirty diner and washed dishes at a bakery just to afford the gas. I stared directly into her eyes, refusing to let her look away. You did not buy me a car. You drained my college savings account entirely. You took every single penny my real mother left for my education and used it to buy Kendra a brand new Mercedes so she could impress her sorority sisters at Spelman. Kendra gasped loudly, her hand flying to her chest. How dare you make up such ridiculous lies in front of our guests? You are just jealous because I actually finished my degree while you quit. I did not quit, Kendra. I corrected her, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy calm. I left because the tuition check stopped clearing. Because Vivian forged my signature to transfer the educational funds to your personal account. I had to leave school to survive while you paraded around campus playing pretend royalty on my dime. My father finally slammed his heavy hand on the table, making the silverware rattle sharply against the porcelain plates. That is enough, Nia. He ordered, his voice booming with the exact authority he used in his Sunday sermons. You will not disrespect your mother and sister in this room. You are embarrassing this entire family. Pick up that invoice, apologize to Kendra immediately, and get back into the kitchen where you belong. For 28 years, that harsh voice had commanded my absolute obedience. For 28 years, I had swallowed my pride and dignity to keep the peace in a family that only ever saw me as a burden. But standing there, surrounded by the opulent wealth of a megachurch built on hypocrisy, looking at the sister who wore my stolen future and the stepmother who orchestrated my misery, something deep inside me finally snapped. I did not cry. I did not yell. I simply looked at my father and smiled. I reached up and slowly unbuttoned my white chef coat. I slipped it off my shoulders, letting it fall directly onto the discarded invoice on the floor. Beneath the coat, I was wearing a sleek, tailored black designer dress. I was no longer the help. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a sleek, heavy titanium card. It was an American Express Centurion black card, an exclusive piece of metal that required massive wealth just to possess, let alone use. The dull, heavy thud it made when I tossed it onto the marble table echoed loudly in the silent room. The hotel general manager, who had rushed over when the shouting started, stared at the card in absolute shock. Charge the entire banquet to this, I told the manager, my voice ringing out clearly for every single guest to hear. Cover the venue, the alcohol, and all the service fees. I turned my attention back to Kendra, whose eyes were bulging, as she stared at the titanium card she had only ever seen in lifestyle magazines. Keep your church money, Kendra, I said softly. Consider it a charitable donation to your sinking lifestyle. I looked at the stunned manager one last time. And cancel the dessert course. My catering company no longer caters to hypocrites. I turned my back on my toxic family, the silent VIP table, and the whispering crowd. I walked away from the grand ballroom with my head held high. I left my greedy family behind to choke on the reality that the daughter they had treated like a peasant had just bought the entire room. I was finally walking toward my ultimate true freedom tonight. But freedom, especially from a family that views you as property, is never granted without a brutal fight. I barely made it halfway across the expansive marble-floored lobby of the Four Seasons before a heavy bruising grip clamped down on my upper arm. The violent yank spun me around so fast my heels skidded against the polished stone. Before I could even register the shock, I was being shoved through a set of heavy mahogany doors and pushed into a secluded, dimly lit service corridor. The heavy doors clicked shut, cutting off the soft jazz and the murmurs of the wealthy congregation. I stumbled back against the silk wallpaper and looked up. Pastor Desmond stood over me, his broad chest heaving, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The charismatic, smiling spiritual leader of Atlanta's largest megachurch was completely gone. In his place was the tyrannical dictator who had ruled my childhood with an iron fist. Right beside him stood Vivian, her eyes narrowed into venomous slits, clutching her diamond necklace as if I might reach out and snatch it from her throat. "Have you lost your absolute mind?" "Nia," my father hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying suppressed volume to avoid being heard through the doors. "You think you can walk into my anniversary banquet, humiliate your sister in front of the most powerful politicians and investors in this city, and just casually stroll out? I will destroy you for this. I will step up to my pulpit this Sunday and tell my flock of 20,000 people that my deeply troubled daughter has lost her mind. I will tell them you are unstable, that you stole money to fund your pathetic little catering business. And I will ensure that not a single soul in Atlanta ever hires you to boil water again." I straightened my posture, refusing to rub my aching arm. I stared right into his furious eyes. "You can tell your congregation whatever lies help you sleep at night," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "But the people I cater for do not sit in your pews. They own the banks your church borrows from. You have no power over me anymore." A slow, arrogant, and deeply sinister laugh echoed from the far end of the corridor. I turned my head. Stepping out of the shadows was DeAndre Kendra's husband. He was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, twirling a sleek leather folder in his manicured hands. DeAndre was a smooth-talking finance broker who had built his reputation entirely off my father's influential connections. He was exactly the kind of man my parents worshipped: wealthy, arrogant, and entirely devoid of a moral compass. "You always were a little too brave for your own good, Nia," DeAndre sneered, pacing slowly toward me. He stopped right beside Vivian, slipping one hand into his pocket. "That was a cute stunt you pulled in there with the black card. Who did you steal it from? One of your rich clients? Or did you lease it for the night just to play pretend? You can act like a boss all you want, but at the end of the day, you are still just the help. And the help needs to learn her place." I kept my expression entirely blank, though my pulse was hammering in my throat. "My business is completely independent from this toxic family, DeAndre," I said sharply. "Keep your fake wealth and your hollow investments. I am done with all of you." DeAndre let out a sharp, mocking chuckle. "Independent." He repeated the word as if it were a hilarious joke. He flipped open the leather folder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents with a red seal stamped on the front. "Is that what you think? You really should pay closer attention to public records, little sister. You see, last month your landlord decided to sell the commercial building where your beloved catering kitchen is located. The building was purchased by a private holding company, my private holding company." The air vanished from my lungs. The temperature in the corridor felt like it dropped 10 degrees in a single second. My commercial kitchen was my entire livelihood. It housed hundreds of thousands of dollars in specialized equipment, industrial ovens, and imported ingredients. It was the beating heart of the luxury catering empire I had killed myself to build from absolute scratch. "I bought the debt on your lease, Nia." DeAndre stepped directly into my personal space, lowering his voice to a dangerous, gloating whisper. "I am your new landlord. And looking at this lease agreement, there is a very convenient clause regarding immediate foreclosure for structural noncompliance. I can lock the doors, seize your equipment, and bankrupt your precious little company by 8 o'clock Monday morning." Vivian stepped forward, a triumphant, wicked smile stretching across her face. "You thought you could outsmart us, you ungrateful brat," she spat. "You thought a fancy credit card makes you untouchable. We own you. We have always owned you. Now you are going to turn around, walk back into that ballroom, and get on your knees. You are going to publicly apologize to Kendra for your jealous outburst. Then you are going to sign your catering business over to DeAndre's holding company to pay for the damages you caused our reputation tonight. If you refuse, you will be homeless and penniless by sunrise." I looked at the three of them. My father radiating cruel authority. My stepmother glowing with vindictive joy. My brother-in-law wielding my financial ruin like a weapon. They expected me to break. They expected me to drop to the marble floor, weep, and beg for their mercy. They wanted the broken, terrified girl they had bullied for 28 years to surrender. I clenched my fists so hard, my fingernails bit into my palms, using the physical pain to anchor my racing, terrified mind. I looked DeAndre dead in the eyes. "Go ahead and lock the doors," I said, my voice shockingly level. refusing to betray the absolute panic tearing through my chest. Foreclose on the kitchen, take the ovens, take the refrigerators. I built my empire with my bare hands while you begged my father for investor leads. I can build it again, but I will never ever bow to any of you again. I did not wait for their reaction. I shoved my shoulder hard against DeAndre, forcing him to stumble out of my way, and pushed through the heavy service doors. I marched out of the hotel, ignoring the valet, and walked straight into the cool, biting night air of the city. I kept my head high and my stride purposeful until I turned the corner and found my car parked in the shadowy garage. The second the car door slammed shut behind me, the adrenaline vanished. My strong, stoic facade shattered completely. I gripped the leather steering wheel, gasping for breath as a massive wave of panic crashed over me. DeAndre was not bluffing. He had the money and the vicious legal team to freeze my assets and lock me out of my kitchen. Without my kitchen, I could not fulfill the massive corporate contracts I had lined up for the upcoming holiday season. I would be sued for breach of contract by some of the most powerful corporations in the state. I would be completely ruined. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, my mind racing through impossible solutions. Could I secure an emergency business loan? Could I find a temporary kitchen to rent by Monday? Could I hire a lawyer fast enough to block the foreclosure? Every option felt like a dead end. They had cornered me perfectly. Suddenly, the harsh ringing of my cell phone shattered the silence of the car. The sound was so jarring I physically jumped. I reached into my purse and pulled out the phone. The screen displayed an unknown number. My immediate thought was that DeAndre was calling from a burner phone to gloat to twist the knife while I was bleeding. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But a strange, heavy intuition compelled me to answer. "Hello," I answered, my voice rough and guarded. "Nia." The voice on the other end was a woman. It was breathless, urgent, and laced with a deep, trembling panic. Nia listened to me very carefully. "Do not hang up." "Who is this?" I demanded, sitting up straight, my senses instantly on high alert. "It is Aunt Valerie," the woman said. My blood ran completely cold. Aunt Valerie, my father's younger sister. The woman who had been aggressively excommunicated from the church and completely banished from the family over 15 years ago. I was barely a teenager when she was cast out. My father had forbidden anyone from ever speaking her name, claiming she was a liar, a thief, and a danger to the congregation. I had not heard her voice since I was 13 years old. "Aunt Valerie," I asked, genuinely stunned. "How did you get my number? Why are you calling me? There is no time to explain on the phone." Valerie urged, her voice dropping to a harsh, fearful whisper as if she were terrified someone might be listening. "I saw what happened at the hotel tonight. I have been watching you from a distance for a very long time. You finally stood up to them, Nia. You finally broke their control. But you are in terrible danger right now. DeAndre's threat is just the beginning." "What do you mean?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "What do you know about DeAndre?" "I know exactly what they have been doing to you," Valerie replied, her breath hitching. "Nia, you need to meet me right now. Go to the 24-hour diner on the edge of the West End district. Come alone and make sure no one follows you." "Valerie, I am not playing games tonight." I warned, frustration bleeding into my panic. "They are trying to take my business. I need to call a lawyer, not meet you for late-night coffee." "Forget the catering business." Valerie snapped, a sudden fierce authority in her tone. "The catering business is a distraction. They are keeping you fighting for crumbs so you do not realize they stole the entire bakery. Nia, everything you know about your life, about Vivian, about your real mother, is a complete and absolute lie." I stopped breathing. The mention of my real mother, a woman who supposedly died penniless and left me as a massive burden to my father, sent a violent shockwave down my spine. "Get to the diner," Valerie pleaded, her voice breaking with desperate emotion. "They never told you who the real heir was, did they? They stole your legacy, Nia. And I have the documents to prove it." I stared at the dashboard, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Aunt Valerie." I whispered into the phone, the name tasting foreign on my tongue. She was a ghost, a family taboo, completely erased from our history when I was 13. My father had stood at his grand pulpit and solemnly told his megachurch congregation that his sister had lost her mind to addiction, banishing her forever. Yes, Nia, Valerie's voice cracked with desperate emotion. Get to the 24-hour diner on the edge of the West End district. Come alone. Make sure no one follows you. The phone line went dead. I threw my car into drive, my tires screeching against the concrete of the parking garage as I sped into the biting Atlanta night. My mind was a chaotic storm of fear and adrenaline. I killed the engine, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I took one deep breath, shoved my car door open, and walked inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried grease. The place was mostly empty. Sitting in the darkest corner booth, nursing a black coffee, was a woman who looked strikingly like my father, but worn down by exhaustion. I walked over and slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from her. Valerie, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Look at you, Nia. She breathed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You look exactly like her. Exactly like your mother. What are you talking about? I look nothing like Vivian. Vivian is not your mother, Nia. Vivian was your father's ambitious church secretary. She did not marry him until you were 3 years old. My breath caught in my throat. Valerie reached down onto the sticky seat beside her and lifted a heavy rusted metal lockbox. She placed it squarely in the center of the table. Inside the box was a thick stack of yellowing manila envelopes. Valerie reached in and pulled out a faded birth certificate, sliding it across the table toward me. Look at the name under Mother, she instructed quietly. I read the typed ink. Mother Camille Sterling. Sterling, I repeated the name, echoing in my mind. The Sterling legacy was one of the oldest, wealthiest, and most fiercely protected Black real estate dynasties in the entire South. They owned prime commercial blocks, historic neighborhoods, and generational wealth that commanded immediate respect in any room. Yes, Valerie whispered, her voice laced with venom toward my father. Your real mother was Camille Sterling. She was the sole remaining heir to the Sterling real estate empire. She fell in love with your father back when he was just a charismatic, smooth-talking junior pastor with empty pockets and big dreams. Her family hated him. They warned her he was a grifter, a man who loved power more than God. But she married him anyway. She had you, Nia. And 2 years later, she died in a tragic car accident on Interstate 20. When Camille died, she left a massive ironclad trust fund, entirely in your name. Valerie continued, pulling out a thick, legal-bound document from the lockbox. It was a $40 million trust completely packed with liquid assets and the deeds to some of the most valuable prime real estate in the city. The money was meant to be released to you the moment you turned 18. I stared blindly at the paperwork, trying to force my brain to process the massive numbers printed on the pages. $40 million. If I had a trust fund like this, why was I washing dishes to pay for community college? Why was I sleeping in my car? Why was Vivian holding a beat-up Honda over my head? Because your father is a monster, Valerie hissed, slapping a stack of bank statements onto the table. When Camille died, Desmond gained temporary conservatorship over the trust until you came of age. But Desmond did not want to wait. He tasted the sterling wealth, and he became completely addicted to the power it bought him. He married Vivian, a woman just as greedy as he was. Together they hired a corrupt team of lawyers and financial advisors to forge your signature and alter the legal structure of the trust. They locked you out of your own fortune, Nia. They gaslit you into believing you were a burdensome, ungrateful peasant while they lived like kings in your castle. Look at these transfers. Look at this withdrawal from your education fund, Valerie demanded, tapping the paper. $120,000. That is the exact amount Vivian used to buy Kendra that luxury Mercedes and pay off the wealthy sorority alumni at Spelman to secure her a crown. They stole your college tuition to buy Kendra a fake socialite status. That is the seed money DeAndre used to start his fake investment firm, Valerie said, her voice dripping with disgust. Desmond funded DeAndre's entire arrogant finance bro persona using your inheritance. DeAndre is not a genius broker. He is a fraud playing with your money. And all those massive expansions to the megachurch, the new broadcasting center, the luxury pastoral jet. Every single brick of that church was bought with stolen sterling money. They built their holy empire on the back of your stolen legacy. The sheer terrifying magnitude of the betrayal crashed down on my shoulders like a ton of bricks. For 28 years, I had believed I was uniquely flawed. I had internalized every cruel comment, every comparison to Kendra, every public humiliation. I had broken my back, burned my hands in hot kitchens, and sacrificed my youth because I thought I owed them for feeding me. They had not been feeding me. They had been feeding off me like parasites. Valerie reached across the table and grasped my trembling hands. I found out what they were doing 15 years ago, she cried softly. I found the forged documents in Desmond's home office. I confronted him. I threatened to go to the police and tell them everything. But your father was too powerful. He had the chief of police in his congregation. He had judges sitting in his front pews. Before I could blow the whistle, Desmond destroyed me. He stood at his pulpit and told 20,000 people I was a thief and an addict. He froze my bank accounts. He drove me out of Atlanta. I have been hiding ever since, waiting for the day you were strong enough to fight back. Tonight, when I saw you throw down that black card at the hotel, I knew you were finally ready. I pulled my hands away from Valerie, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The puzzle pieces were violently slamming together. I thought about the dark, secluded service corridor at the hotel. I thought about DeAndre stepping out of the shadows, twirling his leather folder. I thought about his cruel, gloating smile as he threatened to lock the doors to my catering kitchen by Monday morning. My blood turned to absolute ice. DeAndre had bragged that his private holding company bought the commercial debt on my lease. He was using his fake investment firm to buy the building and force me into bankruptcy. He was using a firm funded entirely by my $2 million. DeAndre's threat to ruin my catering business was being financed by my own stolen money. He was using my stolen legacy to bankrupt me. The suffocating panic that had gripped my chest since I fled the hotel vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating, and lethal fury. I was not a helpless victim begging for scraps at a table that belonged to me. I was the owner of the entire building. "Who are you calling?" Valerie asked, her eyes widening in alarm. "Nia, you cannot confront them directly. Desmond owns the police. If you go to them, he will find a way to bury this. You need to be careful." "I am not calling the police," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper. "The police are for small problems. I need an executioner." I scrolled through my contact list, bypassing the local vendors and suppliers, and stopped at a private, unlisted number. It belonged to a ruthless billionaire venture capitalist, a man known for hostile takeovers, whom I had exclusively catered for during his private corporate retreats. He owed me a massive favor for organizing a flawless event that helped him secure a highly contested corporate merger. I slowly pressed the glowing green call button and held the smartphone to my ear. It rang exactly twice before a deep voice answered. Nia, the billionaire said, sounding genuinely surprised. "It is past midnight. What do you need?" I stared directly into Aunt Valerie's terrified eyes, my own gaze turning absolutely lethal. "I need your best corporate assassin lawyer," I replied smoothly. "Tonight." Less than an hour later, I pulled my car into the underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of Buckhead. The city was asleep, but true power never rests. My client had made one phone call. By the time I stepped out of the private elevator onto the 50th floor, a team of 4 elite wealth managers and forensic accountants was already waiting for me in a massive glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Atlanta skyline. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Vance. Howe was a ruthless corporate attorney known throughout the state for dismantling fraudulent empires and leaving nothing but ashes behind. I walked into the room, placed the rusted metal lockbox directly in the center of the table, and took a seat. I did not waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I looked around the room at the men and women in their sharp midnight suits. "My father is Pastor Desmond," I told them, my voice steady and cold. "My stepmother is Vivian. For the last 15 years, they have been siphoning money from a $40 million trust fund left to me by my late biological mother, Camille Sterling. They used forged signatures to bypass the legal age of distribution. I want you to trace every single dime they stole, freeze the accounts, and prepare to seize every asset they purchased with my legacy." Vance did not blink. He simply reached forward, opened the lockbox, and pulled out the original trust documents and the faded birth certificate Aunt Valerie had given me. He handed the papers to his lead forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Maya. "Find the money," Vance ordered, "and find out exactly what they have been doing with the sterling name." The next 4 hours were a masterclass in financial assassination. The team worked with terrifying speed, pulling up restricted banking records, property deeds, and shell company filings. As the sun began to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting a harsh golden light into the boardroom, the massive digital screen on the wall lit up with a sprawling, intricate web of financial transactions. I sat completely still, my eyes scanning the screen. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking. It was not just stolen tuition money or leased luxury cars. Desmond and Vivian had systematically drained my liquid assets to fund an entire lifestyle of fake opulence. I saw the wire transfers that paid for Kendra's lavish wedding to DeAndre. I saw the massive multi-million-dollar withdrawals funneled directly into the church's tax-exempt accounts to avoid federal scrutiny. My father had used my inheritance to buy private jets, luxury pastoral estates, and the unwavering loyalty of the city's elite. He had bought his entire holy reputation using blood money. But the worst revelation was not what my parents had done. It was what DeAndre was doing right now. Maya, the forensic accountant, typed rapidly on her keyboard, bringing up a new set of highly classified financial records. She turned to me, her expression grim. "Nia, the personal theft is disgusting, but it is small change compared to what your brother-in-law is attempting to pull off. DeAndre is not just a fake finance broker. He is currently orchestrating one of the largest real estate frauds in the history of this city." She clicked a button, and a vibrant professional architectural rendering appeared on the screen. It was titled the West End Renaissance. I knew the project well. DeAndre had been aggressively promoting it on every local news station and social media platform for the past 6 months. He claimed it was a $200 million development bringing luxury condos and upscale retail to the historic West End district. He had convinced dozens of wealthy private investors, including many high-profile members of my father's congregation, to pour their life savings into the project. It was the crown jewel of his fake investment firm. "He has been selling a lie," Maya explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard to bring up the official property deeds. DeAndre collected millions of dollars from private investors, promising that his holding company owns the land. But he does not own a single blade of grass. He never did. She enlarged a commercial property deed on the screen. "The land he is claiming to develop is comprised of 3 massive historic blocks. Those blocks are legally owned by the Sterling Legacy Trust, your trust, Nia." DeAndre had used the forged documents provided by my father to list my ancestral land as collateral. He had basically promised the bank and his investors that he had the backing of the Sterling Empire. He leveraged property he did not own to secure millions in cash, which he has already spent on his lavish lifestyle designer suits and keeping his fake firm afloat. He is selling thin air to investors using your stolen legacy as a safety net. Vance leaned forward. "It is wire fraud, bank fraud, and grand larceny on a federal level. DeAndre has over-leveraged himself into a corner. If the bank finds out he does not hold the deeds, his entire house of cards collapses instantly. He will face decades in federal prison. And your father, having provided the forged financial backing, will go down right beside him as a co-conspirator." They had not just stolen my past. They illegally gambled away the land my mother intended to leave me, using it to fund a criminal enterprise designed to make DeAndre look like a mogul. I felt a dark, cold fury boiling in my veins. The man who had sneered at me in the hotel hallway, the man who had threatened to foreclose on my catering kitchen and leave me homeless, was secretly a broke, desperate criminal standing on the edge of a massive federal indictment. He had tried to bully me into submission because he was terrified. "We have enough evidence right now to contact the authorities," Vance said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "We can have them arrested before lunchtime. We can freeze the remaining trust assets, seize their bank accounts, and have them forcefully removed from their mansion by armed agents today. Do you want me to make the call?" I looked at the undeniable proof of their crimes glowing on the digital screen. I thought about the sheer humiliation of having them hauled out of their sprawling estate in handcuffs. It was a tempting thought, but it was too quick. It was too easy. They had spent 28 years crushing my spirit in the dark. They had made me believe I was a failure while they wore my wealth like a costume. A quiet, private arrest would allow them to play the victims. They would spin a story about a misunderstanding. My father would use his church to garner sympathy. I refused to let them control the narrative ever again. No, I said, my voice cold and resolute. I do not want them arrested today. Vance raised an eyebrow, silently asking for an explanation. They love their public image too much, I told the room of ruthless lawyers. Their entire existence is built on the adoration of the Atlanta elite. If we arrest them quietly, they will just hire fixers to save their reputation. I want to take everything from them, in front of the very people they lied to impress. I want them to fall from the highest possible pedestal. I want maximum inescapable humiliation. Vance smiled coldly. It was a sharp, dangerous smile that perfectly matched my own. A public execution. I highly approve of the strategy. But you need to be aware of the immediate timeline, Nia. Maya pulled up one final bank statement on the screen. DeAndre is completely out of time, she warned. His primary operating account is dangerously overdrawn. The bank is demanding a signed guarantor for a massive bridge loan to keep his fake company solvent until his big investor gala this weekend. He cannot forge a signature for a loan this size without triggering an automatic federal audit. High needs a real living, breathing person with an untainted financial record to sign their name on the dotted line. He is going to come looking for a scapegoat to take the fall for his massive debt. Right on cue, the screen of my cell phone resting on the mahogany table lit up. I could feel the sudden, undeniable shift in power as the harsh vibration echoed loudly in the otherwise perfectly quiet high-rise boardroom. I slowly looked down at the bright, glowing notification illuminating the dark wood. It was a text message from Kendra. The words on the screen made a dark, knowing laugh escape my lips. "We are coming over. We need to talk." I looked up at the entire team of lawyers, my eyes completely devoid of mercy. "Just let them come to me," I said smoothly. "The trap is officially set." I left the glass high-rise boardroom and drove straight back to my modest apartment in Midtown. I had less than an hour to prepare my stage. If Kendra and DeAndre were walking into a trap, they needed to believe they held all the power. I walked into my living room and deliberately made it look like the home of a woman on the verge of a total nervous breakdown. I scattered unpaid catering invoices across the coffee table, left a stack of final notice utility bills near the front door, and pulled my hair out of its neat bun, letting it fall messily around my face. I needed to look desperate. I needed to look like a woman whose entire world was collapsing under the weight of her own failures. I walked into the kitchen and set my phone on the counter, leaning it against a jar of utensils. I opened a voice recording app, hit the record button, and locked the screen. The device would pick up every single word spoken in the room. 10 minutes later, a heavy, aggressive knock echoed through my apartment. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward, and arranged my features into a mask of pure exhaustion. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Kendra stood in the hallway, wearing a pristine cream-colored tailored suit, holding a designer handbag against her chest, as if the very air in my apartment building might contaminate her. DeAndre loomed right behind her, wearing the same arrogant smirk he had worn in the hotel service corridor. He pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, stepping into my living room and looking around with exaggerated disgust. "It smells like cheap cooking oil and desperation in here," Kendra muttered, stepping inside and wiping her hands together. "How do you live in a place this small, Zuri? The ceiling is practically touching my head." I kept my eyes firmly on the floor, playing the part of the broken sister perfectly. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "DeAndre told me he bought my commercial lease. Are you here to kick me out of my apartment too?" DeAndre let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. He walked over to my sofa and kicked a stack of fake unpaid bills out of his way before sitting down. He crossed his legs, resting his ankle on his knee. "We are not here to kick you out," Zuri, DeAndre said smoothly, lacing his fingers together. "We are actually here to help you. We are family after all. Despite the massive public embarrassment you caused at your father's anniversary banquet, Kendra and I believe in second chances. I looked up at him, widening my eyes in feigned surprise. You want to help me? I asked, letting a note of desperate hope seep into my voice. But you said you were going to foreclose on my catering kitchen by Monday morning. You said I would be completely ruined. Kendra sighed loudly, walking over to stand behind her husband. She placed a manicured hand on his shoulder. DeAndre was just angry, Zuri. You have to admit you acted like an absolute lunatic at the hotel. Tossing around some fake credit card, canceling the dessert service, insulting our parents in front of the most elite members of Atlanta society. It was pathetic. But DeAndre is a businessman. He knows how to separate personal feelings from financial reality. DeAndre nodded, unzipping his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and slapped them onto my coffee table right on top of my scattered invoices. I am willing to forgive your little outburst, DeAndre said, leaning forward. I am even willing to forgive the debt on your commercial lease. I will let you keep your catering kitchen, Zuri. I will let you keep your business. But in exchange, I need a tiny favor. I stared at the stack of papers, my heart hammering in my chest. What kind of favor? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I am closing a massive real estate deal this weekend, DeAndre explained, his tone casual and breezy. It is a multi-million-dollar development project in the West End. You have probably seen the news coverage. The bank is ready to release the funds, but they have a ridiculous internal policy regarding bridge loans. They require a secondary guarantor with an unblemished credit history and a clean business record to co-sign the preliminary paperwork. My own assets are currently tied up in other high-yield investments, so I cannot use my own name as the secondary. He pushed the documents across the table toward me. I need you to sign as the guarantor, Zuri. It is just a formality. A simple signature on a dotted line. In exchange, I will tear up the foreclosure notice on your kitchen. You get to keep your little cooking hobby, and I get to finalize my mega project. Everyone wins. I looked down at the documents. The sheer arrogance of his plan was astounding. He had overdrawn his bank accounts funding his fake mogul lifestyle. He desperately needed a clean signature to secure a bridge loan to keep his fraudulent company afloat until his big investor gala. And he thought he could bully me into taking the fall for his massive financial crimes. I slowly reached out and picked up the contract. My hands shook genuinely this time, but not from fear. They shook with the thrilling electric anticipation of watching a predator walk blindly into a trap. I flipped to the second page, scanning the dense legal jargon, and then I saw it. Buried deep in the fine print, hidden beneath layers of complex financial terminology, was the exact address of the collateral being used to secure the massive loan. It was the ancestral land in the West End district. The land legally owned by the Sterling Legacy Trust. The land that belonged entirely to me. DeAndre was not just asking me to co-sign a loan. He was trying to trick me into legally signing away the rights to my own stolen inheritance. He needed the primary owner of the trust to authorize the transaction, so he was using the threat of destroying my catering business to force my hand without me ever realizing what I was actually signing away. It was a brilliantly evil move. If I signed that paper, he would secure his $20 million fraudulent loan, and I would be left holding the bag when the federal authorities inevitably realized the entire project was built on stolen air. I stared at the paper, letting a tear well up in my eye. I sniffled, wiping it away with the back of my hand. I am just so overwhelmed, I whispered, staring blankly at the text. This is a lot of money, DeAndre. What if something goes wrong? What if the bank comes after me? I do not have anything left to give. Nothing is going to go wrong, Zuri. DeAndre snapped, his fake friendly demeanor slipping for a fraction of a second. I am a top-tier investment broker. I handle deals worth 10 times this amount before breakfast. I am giving you a lifeline here. I am offering to save your pathetic business and keep you off the streets. Just sign the damn paper. I cannot just sign this right now, I cried, letting my voice crack with panic. I do not understand any of this legal language. I need someone to look at it. I need to take it to the free legal aid clinic downtown. They have volunteer lawyers who help small business owners review contracts. Please, DeAndre, just give me 48 hours. Let the free clinic read it, and I will sign whatever you want on Monday morning." Kendra let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "A free legal aid clinic." She mocked, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Are you actually serious, Zuri? You want to take a multi-million-dollar corporate contract to a bunch of pro bono law students in a strip mall? You really are determined to stay at the very bottom of the barrel." DeAndre sighed, rubbing his temples in exaggerated frustration. He looked at Kendra, then back at me. A cruel, patronizing smirk spread across his face. He loved this. He loved seeing me broken, terrified, and begging for crumbs. He truly believed he had me completely cornered. "Fine," DeAndre said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Take it to your little volunteer clinic. Let them tell you what a massive favor I am doing for you. But you bring that contract fully signed and notarized to the Winter Gala tomorrow night. You are still catering the event for free to pay off your debt to the family. Bring the contract to the kitchen. If I do not have your signature by the time they serve the main course, I will ruin you." "I promise," I whispered, clutching the contract to my chest. "Thank you, DeAndre. Thank you for giving me a chance." "Do not thank him," Kendra sneered, adjusting her designer handbag. "Just learn your place, Zuri. You should be grateful we even acknowledge you. Make sure the appetizers tomorrow night are actually edible. I do not want my friends getting sick from your cheap ingredients." They turned and walked out of my apartment, slamming the door shut behind them. I stood in the center of my living room, staring at the closed door. The frightened, broken expression on my face vanished instantly. I dropped the contract onto the coffee table and walked straight into the kitchen. I picked up my phone from the counter and stopped the voice recording. I played back the last few minutes of audio. DeAndre's voice echoed clearly through the small kitchen, boasting about his fake real estate deal, admitting to using the West End property to secure the loan, and threatening to destroy my business if I did not sign the forged documents. It was an absolute masterpiece of self-incrimination. He had just confessed to wire fraud, extortion, and bank fraud on a crystal-clear digital recording. I smiled a slow, lethal smile. I opened my messaging app, attached the audio file, and sent it directly to Vance, the ruthless corporate attorney waiting in the glass high-rise. I typed a quick message to accompany the file. He took the bait. "Freeze the accounts. Let the games begin." I set the phone down and walked over to my window, looking out at the city skyline. DeAndre and Kira truly believed they had won. They believed their positions of power were absolute. They thought they could waltz into my home, mock my entire existence, and casually force me into a federal crime to save their own sinking ship. The sheer magnitude of their arrogance was going to be the exact instrument of their spectacular destruction. Tomorrow night was the highly anticipated Winter Gala, the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta's high society calendar. It was the event where DeAndre planned to pitch his fraudulent mega project to the wealthiest investors in the state. He expected me to be sweating in the back kitchen, terrified out of my mind, desperately signing my own death warrant to appease him. He had absolutely no idea that the woman he just threatened was currently holding the executioner's axe over his head. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. Hanging in the very back, carefully wrapped in protective black garment bags, was a custom designer gown I had purchased years ago with my catering profits, but never had the courage to wear. It was bold, unapologetic, and screamed absolute authority. I ran my hand down the expensive fabric. I was not going to be serving appetizers tomorrow night. I was going to serve them a reality check they would never forget. The time for playing the helpless victim was permanently over. The sterling legacy was finally coming back to its rightful owner. Early the next morning, I sat in my quiet kitchen and watched the digital confirmation roll across my glowing laptop screen. Vance and his team of ruthless wealth managers had not wasted a single second. The audio recording I sent them of DeAndre actively confessing to leveraging the West End property was all the ammunition they needed to strike. With one highly classified legal filing, Vance executed a complete and total asset freeze on the entire Sterling Legacy Trust. It was a completely invisible but utterly devastating maneuver. The exact moment the freeze hit the global banking system, an automated algorithm immediately flagged every single financial account connected to the trust. That sweeping freeze included the fraudulent holding company, DeAndre was running the offshore tax shelters my father had secretly set up for his church, and the personal elite checking accounts Vivian and Kendra used to fund their daily luxury shopping sprees. The massive bank computers instantly locked down every single penny. No withdrawals were allowed, no wire transfers could be sent, no premium credit authorizations would go through. The financial oxygen supply to my toxic family was permanently cut off, and they were entirely oblivious to the catastrophe. They woke up that morning cheerfully believing they were still the untouchable royalty of Atlanta high society. They had absolutely no idea they were already completely bankrupt and facing an impending violent storm that would rip their fake lives apart piece by piece. I sipped my black coffee and smiled at the glowing screen, feeling a profound sense of justice washing over me. For years, they had used my stolen money to build a fortress of arrogance around themselves. They had weaponized my own inheritance to keep me trapped in a cycle of poverty and relentless emotional abuse. Now, the very foundation of their glamorous existence had been digitally erased by a team of lawyers operating entirely in the shadows. The trap had been sprung, and the dominoes were perfectly aligned to fall. I simply had to sit back and wait for the frantic, desperate chaos to begin. The countdown to their ultimate public destruction was officially ticking, and I was controlling the clock. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Kendra walked into an ultra-exclusive high-end designer boutique in the affluent neighborhood of Buckhead. She was proudly accompanied by three of her most judgmental, wealthy sorority sisters. This was her inner circle of superficial friends women who measured a person's absolute worth entirely by the designer brand of shoes they wore and the exclusive zip code they lived in. Kendra was there to purchase her magnificent dress for the highly anticipated winter gala taking place the following evening. She had previously selected a stunning custom beaded silk gown with a staggering price tag of exactly $15,000. She paraded out of the velvet-lined fitting room, twirling elegantly for her friends and soaking in their deeply envious compliments. She walked up to the pristine marble checkout counter with absolute unearned arrogance. She casually handed the sales associate her sleek platinum premium credit card, fully expecting the usual obsequious service she felt she inherently deserved. The associate, a polite young woman, respectfully swiped the heavy metal card through the boutique terminal. The terminal beeped a harsh, sharp sound of instant rejection. The associate frowned deeply and tried swiping it again. "I am so terribly sorry, ma'am," the associate said softly. "This card is currently being declined by your bank." Kendra scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes at her wealthy friends, as if the young cashier were an absolute idiot. "That is completely impossible," she snapped, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. "Run the card again. Your machine is clearly broken and malfunctioning." "Do you have any idea who my father is in this city?" The associate tried it a third time and shook her head apologetically. "It is definitely declining, ma'am. The banking system says the transaction is strictly prohibited." Kendra let out a dramatic heavy sigh and angrily snatched the platinum card out of the associate's trembling hand. "Fine," she huffed, digging aggressively into her designer handbag. "I will just use my other premium card. The bank probably flagged it for a large purchase because I buy so much luxury inventory." She slapped a different elite credit card onto the cold marble counter, demanding immediate service. The associate swiped the second card through the machine. Another harsh beep echoed loudly through the quiet luxury boutique. The machine instantly printed out a small slip of paper with a bold red error code. "I am very sorry, but this one is also declining," the associate whispered, looking incredibly uncomfortable and anxious. "In fact, the system is telling me to physically retain the card and instruct you to contact your financial institution immediately." Kendra's perfectly made-up face flushed a deep, angry crimson. Her friends, who had been happily sipping complimentary champagne nearby, suddenly fell dead silent. In the cutthroat, ruthless world of Atlanta high society, a declined credit card was the ultimate unforgivable embarrassment. It was a scent of weakness that social sharks could smell from a mile away. "You are completely incompetent," Kendra yelled, her voice echoing sharply off the expensive boutique walls. "Give me back my card right now. I am calling my personal wealth manager on speakerphone so you and everyone else in this store can hear exactly how much money I have in my accounts. You are going to be fired for this level of disrespect. Kendra snatched her phone from her purse and dialed the premium customer service line for her bank. She hit the speaker button, holding the phone up like a weapon. A polite customer service representative answered the call. Hello, you have reached Premier Banking Services. How can I assist you today? This is Kendra, and your system just declined my purchases, she demanded furiously. I am standing in a luxury boutique and your broken system is humiliating me. Look at my balances right now and fix this absolute disaster before I close all my accounts permanently. Please hold for one moment, ma'am, while I pull up your profile, the representative said calmly. There was a brief, tense silence filled only by the sound of Kendra tapping her foot impatiently against the floor. Her friends exchanged knowing sideways glances, whispering to each other behind their champagne glasses. Thank you for holding, ma'am, the representative finally said, his voice suddenly stripped of its cheerful customer service tone, replacing it with corporate coldness. I see your accounts here. Unfortunately, I cannot authorize any transactions today. All of your personal and business accounts have been forcefully locked by our strict fraud prevention department. What are you talking about? Kendra shrieked, gripping the marble counter tightly. I did not report any fraud. Unlock my money right now. I am sorry, ma'am, the representative replied, his voice echoing clearly through the entire store. You do not have the authority to unlock these funds. The primary account holder of the Sterling Legacy Trust has frozen these assets pending a federal fraud investigation. Your access to these funds has been permanently revoked. If you have questions, you need to contact federal authorities directly. The boutique was completely silent. Kendra stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without making a single sound. She looked at her three wealthy friends. The women were backing away, their faces twisted in shock. No one wanted to be publicly associated with a federal fraud investigation. The social execution was immediate and ruthless. We actually have to go, Kendra, one of her friends, said coldly, setting her champagne glass down on a display table. Good luck with your legal problems today. They walked out of the boutique, leaving Kendra standing abandoned. She grabbed her phone and sprinted to her car in tears. She had absolutely no idea that I was the powerful primary account holder who had just destroyed her life. Later that evening, Desmond called an absolute emergency family meeting in his grand study. They were entirely out of cash. DeAndre paced the room, saying confidently, "Do not panic. The Winter Gala is tomorrow. Once I pitch the West End project to the investors, we will have $20 million in cash. We just need Zuri to cater it for free so we save face. She will bring the high-end food, she will bring the professional staff, and she will blindly sign the guarantor contract so I can secure the final bridge loan. Zuri is going to save us, and she does not even realize it." They all agreed immediately, their greed blinding them to the truth. They truly believed I was their desperate, obedient savior. They had absolutely no idea I was the meticulous architect of their impending destruction, and I was bringing a whole new level of hell to their winter gala tomorrow night to finish the job forever. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Biltmore Hotel was completely transformed for the annual winter gala. This was not just another high society party. It was the undisputed pinnacle of the Black elite social calendar. The massive space was dripping with extreme generational wealth and manufactured prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of round tables covered in imported white silk and towering floral centerpieces made of rare orchids. The guest list was an exclusive roster of Southern royalty. Prominent local politicians, wealthy real estate moguls, and distinguished alumni from prestigious historically Black colleges and universities were all rubbing shoulders. A 12-piece jazz orchestra played smooth melodies from a raised mahogany stage, while waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated smoothly with silver trays of expensive champagne. Right in the absolute center of the room, holding court like royalty, was my truly toxic family. Pastor Desmond stood tall and imposing in a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo, laughing loudly with a group of influential city councilmen. He was using his booming, charismatic voice to charm the politicians, acting like the ultimate spiritual and financial leader of the community. Standing right beside him was Vivian, draped in heavy diamonds and a shimmering silver evening gown. She was expertly working the crowd of wealthy pastors' wives, smiling sweetly and playing the role of the humble, devoted matriarch. A few feet away, DeAndre and Kendra were surrounded by a large group of eager, wealthy investors. DeAndre looked smug, sipping a glass of rare bourbon while boasting loudly about his upcoming West End Renaissance megaproject. I could see him gesturing wildly, painting a picture of massive financial returns, upscale shopping centers, and luxury condominiums. He was selling them a total fantasy, using his broker persona to convince them to hand over their life savings. Kendra stood dutifully by his side, nodding along and flashing her brilliant pageant queen smile. She was wearing a stunning designer dress I knew she had purchased on a credit card that was currently frozen by a federal fraud investigation. They all looked so incredibly confident, so deeply entrenched in their own arrogance. They were flat broke. Their bank accounts were locked, and their entire empire was built on stolen air, yet they stood there projecting massive, undeniable wealth. Every few minutes, I watched DeAndre shoot a nervous, impatient glance toward the heavy wooden doors leading to the service kitchen. He was eagerly waiting for me. He fully expected me to come shuffling out of that kitchen, wearing a stained white chef coat, sweating from standing over hot stoves all day, carrying silver trays of appetizers to serve his wealthy guests. He thought I was back there, absolutely terrified and desperate, preparing to blindly sign my own name on his fraudulent bridge loan contract just to save my catering business. He had absolutely no idea that I was not in the kitchen. I had not stepped foot in that kitchen all day. My catering staff was running the service perfectly without me, per my strict instructions. I was standing in the grand foyer just outside the main ballroom doors, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I smoothed my hands down the sides of my dress. I was wearing a custom $40,000 haute couture gown that I had flown in specifically for this exact moment. The dress was a deep, striking emerald green made of heavy imported silk that poured over my curves like liquid glass. It featured a dramatic plunging neckline, a high slit, and intricate gold beadwork that caught the light with every slight movement. I paired it with sleek gold stilettos and a breathtaking diamond necklace that sat perfectly against my collarbone. My hair was styled in flawless, voluminous curls that cascaded down my bare back. I looked powerful. I looked wealthy. I looked exactly like the primary heir of the Sterling Legacy Trust. Standing immediately to my left was my ruthless corporate attorney, dressed in a sharp, intimidating midnight blue suit. Standing to my right was Maya, the brilliant forensic accountant, looking completely lethal in a tailored black blazer. We were a perfectly synchronized execution squad, and it was time to drop the guillotine. I gave a sharp nod to the two uniformed security guards standing by the massive mahogany doors. They grabbed the heavy brass handles and pulled the grand doors open simultaneously. I did not sneak into the room. I did not walk in through the service entrance. I strode directly through the main guest doors, stepping onto the plush carpet of the grand ballroom with absolute, unyielding authority. My legal team flanked me like elite bodyguards, their expressions completely devoid of mercy. The impact was absolute and immediate. The wealthy guests standing near the entrance turned to look at the new arrivals. The conversations began to die down as people took in the sight of my expensive gown and the radiating power of my entrance. The silence rippled through the massive ballroom like a tidal wave, moving from the back of the room all the way to the front. Within 30 seconds, the entire gala had fallen quiet. Even the jazz orchestra stopped playing, the musicians lowering their instruments as they noticed the sudden dramatic shift in the room. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me. I kept my head high, my posture perfectly straight, and continued walking slowly down the center aisle of the ballroom. I let the heavy silence hang in the air, allowing everyone to get a good long look at the woman my family had consistently labeled a failure and a college dropout. At the center of the room, my family finally realized what was happening. I watched the exact moment the realization hit them. It was unadulterated paralysis. DeAndre stopped mid-sentence, his jaw dropping slightly as he stared at me in shock. The glass of bourbon in his hand tilted, spilling a few drops of amber liquid onto his expensive leather shoes. He looked at my dress, then at the two intimidating lawyers walking beside me, and all the arrogant color rapidly drained from his face. Kendra looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her eyes were wide with pure horror, her perfectly manicured hands trembling visibly at her sides. She immediately recognized the designer gown I was wearing. She knew exactly how much a dress like that cost, and her brain was short-circuiting trying to figure out how the sister she treated like a peasant was currently outshining every single woman in the room. Pastor Desmond stood frozen, his charismatic smile completely vanishing, replaced by a dark, terrified scowl, but Vivian reacted first. Panic and fury instantly hijacked her features. She immediately broke away from her group of wealthy pastors' wives and began speed-walking toward me, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. She plastered a fake strained smile on her face for the watching guests, but as she closed the distance between us, her eyes were burning with toxic venom. She reached me in the middle of the aisle, attempting to grab my arm to pull me out of the spotlight. I stepped backwards smoothly and effortlessly, dodging her grasp. "What on earth are you doing?" Zuri Vivian hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic, furious whisper so the nearby guests would not hear. "Have you completely lost your mind? Where did you get that dress? Did you steal it from one of your catering clients? You look ridiculous playing dress up." I simply looked down at her, calmly maintaining my cold, emotionless facade. "Get into the kitchen right now," Vivian demanded, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You are supposed to be plating the appetizers. DeAndre is about to give his big pitch to the investors, and you are out here ruining the entire image of this family. If you do not turn around and march back through those service doors this instant, we will destroy your business. Take off that stolen designer dress and get to work before you ruin everything." I did not break my eye contact. I calmly reached out my hand as a passing waiter walked by holding a silver tray. I delicately picked up a crystal flute filled with expensive champagne. I brought the glass to my lips, took a slow, elegant sip, and swallowed. The champagne was cold, crisp, and tasted exactly like victory. I lowered the glass and looked Vivian dead in the eyes. I let a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. "I am absolutely not here to serve Vivian," I said, my voice projecting clearly and carrying enough volume for DeAndre, Kendra, and Desmond to hear every single word. "I am here to collect." Vivian gasped, taking a physical step backward, as if I had just struck her across the face. The absolute certainty in my voice completely shattered her arrogant illusion forever as she stared at the lethal corporate lawyers standing closely beside me. Vivian took another unsteady step backward. The heavy diamonds around her neck suddenly looked like a choke collar. She opened her mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. She spun around and hurried back toward my father, her silver heels sinking heavily into the plush carpet. She was fleeing the battlefield like a total coward, utterly terrified of the truth, leaving her precious golden child to handle the absolute disaster unfolding in the very center of the room. Kendra nervously watched her mother retreat. Panic flared in her eyes for a fraction of a second before her intense survival instincts kicked in. In Kendra's superficial world, perception was reality. If she could control the narrative, she could control the room. She aggressively smoothed her designer gown, plastered on a vicious smile, and gestured sharply to her inner circle. Three women immediately detached themselves from the crowd and moved to flank her. These were her elite sorority sisters, the wealthy, judgmental gatekeepers of Atlanta's Black High Society. They were women who spent days organizing lavish charity luncheons and nights destroying reputations over expensive craft cocktails at the most exclusive private country clubs in the city. Leading the pack was Chloe, a woman wearing an expensive diamond tennis bracelet and a look of icy disdain. Jasmine and Tiffany walked right behind her, their heels clicking in unison. Kendra and her friends closed ranks, forming a wall of hostile luxury right in front of me. The surrounding guests leaned in closer, practically hungry for the impending social warfare. Kendra looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the intricate gold beadwork of my custom silk gown. She instantly let out a sharp theatrical laugh designed specifically to echo loudly across the silent ballroom. "Look at my sister pretending she belongs here," Kendra announced loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the wealthy investors standing nearby. She turned to Chloe and the other women, shaking her head in mock pity. "I sincerely apologize for the disruption, ladies. Zuri has always struggled with reality. Tell me, Zuri, did you rent that dress with your catering tips? Or did you max out another high-interest credit card just to play dress up for one night and embarrass our family in public? You truly look like a clown. Chloe and the other women chuckled perfectly on cue, forming a cruel, synchronized chorus of high society mockery. They looked at me with absolute contempt, fully ready to help Kendra tear me down and protect their exclusive circle. They thought I was an incredibly easy target, a desperate, pathetic woman wearing a rented dress completely out of her depth in a room full of self-made millionaires. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I stood perfectly still, calmly letting their arrogant laughter slowly die out in the heavy, expectant air. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my expensive champagne, letting the cold liquid slide down my throat deeply, savoring the crisp taste of absolute victory. I handed the empty crystal flute to Maya, who took it without taking her lethal, calculating gaze off Kendra. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the women who had tormented me for years. I bypassed a stunned Kendra entirely and confidently locked my eyes directly on Chloe. The smug smile on Chloe's face faltered slightly under the immense weight of my absolute, unwavering confidence. "You look exceptionally beautiful tonight, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth, pleasant, and chillingly calm. "That diamond tennis bracelet catches the chandelier light perfectly. It is a genuine shame you are going to have to sell it to a pawn shop by Monday morning." Chloe stiffened, her eyes narrowing angrily as she crossed her arms. "Excuse me, what exactly are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice instantly losing its mocking edge and replacing it with genuine dread. I took another step closer, lowering my voice just enough to force the surrounding guests to lean in and hang on my every word. "I am talking about the second mortgage you secretly took out on your massive six-bedroom estate in Alpharetta last month," I replied effortlessly. "I am talking about the undeniable fact that you quietly drained your children's private school tuition funds to secure liquid cash behind your husband's back. You gave DeAndre $200,000, didn't you, Chloe? You wired the money directly into his holding company account last Thursday at exactly 2 in the afternoon." Chloe's jaw dropped. The color completely drained from her perfectly contoured face. She stumbled backward as if I had physically shoved her in the chest. "How do you know that?" she whispered, genuine terror entirely replacing her high society arrogance. "My husband does not even know about that wire transfer." "I know everything about DeAndre's fraudulent accounts," I stated clearly, letting my commanding gaze sweep over the other two women standing beside Kendra. "I know that you, Jasmine, completely liquidated your diverse stock portfolio to hand him $400,000 in cash. And you, Tiffany, convinced your elderly parents to invest $500,000 from their hard-earned retirement savings. DeAndre promised all of you a massive guaranteed financial return on the West End Renaissance project. He told you he owned the land outright. I told you it was the absolute safest investment in Atlanta." The three women stared at me in horrified silence. The surrounding crowd began to murmur loudly, the wealthy investors exchanging highly alarmed, panicked looks. DeAndre, standing just a few feet away, looked like he was about to collapse and vomit onto the plush carpet. "He lied to all of you," I announced, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "He does not legally own a single square inch of the historic West End property. He forged the collateral documents using stolen deeds. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, his fake investment firm is under a massive federal fraud investigation. Every single dime you gave him is entirely gone." "That is a disgusting lie," Kendra shrieked, stepping aggressively in front of her friends. Her voice was shrill, desperate, and entirely stripped of its former elegance. "Do not listen to her. She is clinically insane. DeAndre is a top-tier broker. We are incredibly wealthy. She is just a jealous, bitter caterer trying to ruin our flawless reputation with baseless accusations." I slowly turned my full attention back to my sister. I looked at the panicked sweat forming on her forehead. I looked at the trembling hands she was desperately trying to hide behind her designer clutch. "If you are so incredibly wealthy, Kendra," I asked, tilting my head slightly, "why did your premium credit cards decline at the luxury boutique in Buckhead yesterday afternoon?" Kendra froze. Her entire body went completely rigid. The silence in the ballroom was absolutely deafening. Chloe, Jasmine, and Tiffany whipped their heads around to stare intensely at Kendra. I continued, my voice merciless and legally precise. You tried to buy a $15,000 gown. Your platinum card was instantly declined. You threw a massive tantrum, handed the cashier a second card, and that one was declined too. The bank representative on speakerphone told you your accounts were locked due to a federal fraud investigation. You ran out of the store in tears, leaving your friends behind. You might want to ask Kendra why her credit cards declined at the boutique yesterday, Chloe. You might want to ask her where your $200,000 really went. Chloe grabbed Kendra's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging sharply into the expensive silk of Kendra's dress. Is that true? Chloe demanded, her voice rising in sheer, unadulterated panic. Did your cards decline yesterday? Did DeAndre steal our money? Kendra stammered, frantically shaking her head, her eyes darting wildly around the beautifully decorated room. No. No, Chloe, please listen to me. It was just a banking error. The internal system was down. DeAndre has the money. We have the money safely secured. I promise you she is telling a horrible lie. It was not a banking error. I corrected her smoothly, raising my voice to ensure the entire room heard the final nail in the coffin. The primary account holder of the Sterling Legacy Trust executed an emergency asset freeze on all linked accounts. I am the primary account holder. Your money is locked, Kendra. Your house is collateral for a fraudulent loan. Your husband is facing decades in a federal penitentiary. You are completely and entirely bankrupt. Jasmine shoved Kendra's shoulder hard, her face twisted in absolute blinding fury. You told us this was a guaranteed investment. You swore your family owned the land free and clear. You stole from us, Kendra. You stole my innocent children's money to exclusively fund your fake, pathetic lifestyle. Please, you have to believe me. Kendra begged, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her flawless designer makeup. DeAndre is going to pitch the project tonight. The investors are all here. We are going to double your money. Just wait until the presentation. There is not going to be a presentation, I stated, stepping back to stand securely beside my ruthless corporate lawyers. There is only going to be an execution. Kendra's elite friends turned on her instantly. The carefully constructed elite sorority facade completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces right before my eyes. Chloe yanked her arm away from Kendra in pure disgust. Tiffany pulled out her phone, frantically dialing her husband. Jasmine stepped right into Kendra's face, pointing a trembling, furious finger at her chest. I am calling the authorities right now. Jasmine spat, her voice echoing loudly in the tense ballroom. I am telling every single person in this city that you and your husband are common thieves. You are entirely finished in Atlanta, Kendra. You are absolute garbage. The three women turned their backs on my sister and marched away, disappearing quickly into the chaotic, whispering crowd of panicked investors. Kendra was left standing completely alone in the absolute center of the grand ballroom. The golden child, the former pageant queen, the untouchable socialite, was now utterly and completely isolated. She stood there stammering desperately, looking around the massive room for anyone to help her. But the wealthy guests she had spent her entire life trying to impress were now looking at her with nothing but sheer, unadulterated contempt. Her parents were hiding in the dark shadows. Her husband was paralyzed with intense fear. Her closest friends had viciously abandoned her. I stood tall in my emerald gown and watched my sister's fake empire burn to the absolute ground. She had spent 28 years trying to make me feel small. She had stolen my college tuition, mocked my career, and treated me like a worthless servant. Now she was experiencing the exact isolation and deep humiliation she had forced upon me for my entire life. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt only the cold, satisfying rush of absolute justice. The first major domino had officially fallen, and I knew with absolute certainty that the rest of the highly toxic family structure was about to collapse right behind it. While Kendra stood frozen in her personal nightmare at the back of the ballroom, her husband remained entirely oblivious at the front of the room. DeAndre had just stepped onto the raised mahogany stage. He adjusted the lapels of his custom suit, flashing a blinding, arrogant smile to the crowd of wealthy investors. The jazz orchestra faded into silence as he tapped the microphone. The harsh feedback echoed through the massive space, commanding the absolute attention of every single politician, real estate mogul, and church elder present. DeAndre was in his element. How was a master manipulator, a man who possessed an unnatural ability to sell absolute garbage to the highest bidder. He raised his hands, signaling for the massive digital projector screen behind him to lower. A breathtaking high-definition architectural rendering illuminated the dark stage. The screen displayed towering glass high-rises, sprawling upscale retail centers, and lush, perfectly manicured green spaces. Bold gold lettering flashed across the top of the image reading West End Renaissance. "Welcome, my friends, my family, my esteemed colleagues," DeAndre announced, his voice booming with fake humility. "Tonight we are not just celebrating 30 years of Pastor Desmond's incredible spiritual leadership. We are standing on the precipice of history. We are looking at the future of Atlanta." The crowd erupted into polite, eager applause. Desmond, sitting at the VIP table right below the stage, clapped the loudest. He nodded approvingly at his son-in-law, entirely confident that his fraudulent empire was about to secure another $20 million in clean, untraceable investor cash. Vivian sat beside Desmond, nervously twisting her diamond ring, her eyes darting frantically toward the back of the room where she had left me. She knew I was a threat, but she had no idea how deeply the knife was already buried. DeAndre began pacing the stage, projecting pure, undeniable confidence. "For decades, the West End district has been ignored by major developers," he continued, pointing a laser pointer at the glowing screen. "But my firm saw the untapped potential. We saw a community desperate for revitalization. We saw an opportunity to build luxury living spaces that will guarantee a minimum 40% return on investment within the first 2 years of development." I stood in the shadows near the entrance, flanked by Vance and Maya, watching the spectacular performance unfold. It was truly sickening. DeAndre was standing up there, using the vocabulary of community empowerment to steal the life savings of the very people sitting in my father's congregation. Several prominent investors in the front row were literally leaning forward in their seats, their eyes practically glowing with unadulterated greed. They were entirely ready to hand over their checkbooks to a man selling them pure fiction. "Now I know what you savvy investors are thinking," DeAndre said smoothly, lowering the microphone slightly for dramatic effect. "You are wondering how my firm managed to secure the most coveted, highly contested blocks of commercial real estate in the entire city. You are wondering how we bypassed the massive bidding wars against rival billion-dollar corporations." DeAndre paused, soaking in the rapt attention of the wealthy audience. He pointed directly at Desmond. "It is because we operate with absolute integrity, guided by the spiritual principles taught by Pastor Desmond himself. But more importantly, it is because we secured an exclusive ironclad partnership with the most historically significant landowner in the South." A low murmur of intense curiosity swept through the ballroom. This was the exact lie he needed to sell to close the trap. This was the moment he cemented his federal wire fraud charges perfectly. "I am incredibly proud to announce," DeAndre declared, his voice ringing with absolute triumph, "that my firm has successfully finalized a joint venture with the Sterling Legacy Trust." A collective gasp of genuine awe echoed through the crowd. The Sterling name carried massive, undeniable weight in Atlanta. It represented untouchable generational wealth. By invoking my mother's family name, DeAndre was essentially telling the investors that his project was backed by a fortress of gold. He was leveraging a reputation he had actively helped steal to build a criminal empire. "The primary landowner of the Sterling Trust has personally reviewed our architectural plans." DeAndre lied, effortlessly pacing back to the center of the stage. "They believe in our vision, they believe in my leadership, and they have agreed to authorize the transfer of the final property deeds to my holding company tonight." Desmond stood up from his VIP seat, grabbing a microphone of his own to add his heavy spiritual endorsement to the scam. "God is truly moving in this room tonight," Desmond preached, his voice booming over the speakers. "How is providing the ultimate holy cover for a massive criminal enterprise. The Lord has blessed my son-in-law with unprecedented favor. We are witnessing a monumental transfer of wealth that will elevate this entire congregation." The investors began clapping enthusiastically. I could see wealthy deacons pulling out their phones, likely preparing to transfer massive sums of money into DeAndre's overdrawn, deeply fraudulent accounts. They were completely sold. The deception was entirely flawless. But DeAndre was not finished. He wanted to maximize the dramatic flair of his presentation. He checked his expensive gold watch and looked toward the back of the room. In fact, DeAndre announced a smug, victorious grin stretching across his face. The final legal authorization was scheduled to arrive exactly right now. Right on cue, the heavy brass handles of the grand ballroom doors turned. The massive mahogany doors swung open with a slow, dramatic creak that echoed loudly over the applause. The crowd turned their heads eagerly, expecting to see a courier delivering the final paperwork to seal the highly lucrative deal. Stepping through the doorway was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair at his temples. He was dressed in a pristine, custom-tailored charcoal suit, carrying a heavy combination locked leather briefcase. He radiated an aura of old, terrifying money. This was Mr. Caldwell, the senior executive director of the elite wealth management firm that oversaw the Sterling Legacy Trust. He was a man who handled billions of dollars before breakfast, and he did not suffer fools. DeAndre's eyes lit up with absolute blinding greed. He had been waiting for this exact moment all night. He believed Caldwell was simply a high-paid messenger boy, bringing the forged bridge loan documents that I was supposedly coerced into signing in the back kitchen. DeAndre thought he had won the ultimate prize. "Ladies and gentlemen," DeAndre announced proudly, gesturing grandly toward the entrance, "please welcome the senior representative from the Sterling Legacy Trust, bringing the final authorized deeds to make the West End Renaissance a legal reality." The ballroom erupted into polite, excited applause. Desmond smiled widely, adjusting his velvet tuxedo jacket, fully ready to celebrate his massive financial victory. Vivian finally looked away from me, her eyes locking onto the leather briefcase with pure, unadulterated hunger. Mr. Caldwell walked down the long, plush center aisle of the ballroom. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and entirely unhurried. He did not smile. He did not acknowledge the clapping investors. He kept his gaze locked straight ahead, completely ignoring the eager, expectant faces of the Atlanta elite. DeAndre practically skipped down the short wooden steps of the stage to meet Caldwell halfway. He wanted to make a public show of accepting the documents proving his elite status to the room. DeAndre extended his hand, flashing a brilliant, arrogant smile. "Thank you so much for bringing the final deeds," Mr. Caldwell, DeAndre said loudly, making sure the microphone clipped to his lapel caught every single word. "It is an absolute honor to do business with the Sterling Trust. My firm looks forward to a very long, highly profitable partnership." DeAndre stood there, his hand outstretched completely, ready to grasp his stolen victory. Mr. Caldwell did not break his stride. He did not slow down. He did not even look at DeAndre's face. Caldwell walked straight past DeAndre, leaving the arrogant finance broker standing there with his hand extended in the empty air. The smooth, confident smile on DeAndre's face instantly froze. The enthusiastic applause from the wealthy investors abruptly died down, replaced by a sudden heavy wave of utter confusion. Desmond's victorious grin completely vanished. Vivian let out a sharp, terrified gasp. Caldwell bypassed the VIP table entirely. He walked directly toward the back of the ballroom, heading straight for the shadows where I stood flanked by Vance and Maya. The crowd parted instantly, watching in stunned, breathless silence as the distinguished executive approached the woman in the emerald green haute couture gown. He placed the heavy leather briefcase down on a table and unlocked the combination with a loud click. He turned to face me, placing his hand over his heart. He bowed deeply. "Madam Chairman Caldwell," said his authoritative voice cutting through the dead silence, "your estate documents are ready for execution." The entire ballroom stopped breathing. The absolute impossibility of the moment crashed over the crowd like a physical wave. I did not smile. I simply nodded to Mr. Caldwell and reached out, accepting the heavy leather portfolio he offered. I stepped past him, leaving my protective flank of lawyers, and walked directly toward the raised mahogany stage. DeAndre was completely frozen. His eyes were glassy, staring at me as if I were a terrifying apparition rising from the dead. He did not move a single muscle as I climbed the short wooden steps. I walked right up to him, stopping inches away from his paralyzed, trembling frame. I reached out and calmly took the microphone straight from his cold, sweaty hand. He let it go without a single ounce of resistance, His mind had completely shattered. I turned to face the massive crowd of investors, church elders, and high society socialites. The silence was so profound, I could hear the faint hum of the projector running behind me. Maya, my forensic accountant, moved swiftly to the media control booth at the edge of the stage. She connected a heavily encrypted flash drive to the central audiovisual system. I looked down at Vivian and Desmond sitting at the VIP table. Vivian had both hands clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. Desmond was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles entirely white, his face drained of all its charismatic color. "Take a very good look at the screen behind me," I instructed the room, my voice echoing with chilling, crystal-clear authority through the massive speakers. The beautiful, vibrant, three-dimensional renderings of the West End Renaissance abruptly vanished. The towering glass high-rises and lush green spaces disappeared into blackness. In their place, a stark white document flashed onto the massive display. It was a high-definition scan of the original unedited Sterling Legacy Trust deed. The document clearly showed the vast commercial blocks of the historic West End district alongside a bold, legally binding ownership seal. The name printed under the sole beneficiary line was completely undeniable. The name was mine. My parents have spent the better part of a decade telling everyone in this room that I am a failure. I announced, my voice slicing through the heavy, tense air like a perfectly sharpened blade. They told you I was a college dropout. They told you I was a bitter, jealous woman who lacked the ambition and grace of my older sister. They painted a beautiful, tragic picture of their own endless patience while dealing with a troubled, ungrateful child. I pressed a button on the remote Maya had handed me. The screen shifted instantly. Two documents appeared side by side. On the left was the official withdrawal ledger from my private college savings account. On the right was the direct deposit receipt into Kendra's personal checking account. The amount transferred was $120,000. They did not tell you that they systematically drained my college tuition to fund Kendra's lavish lifestyle. I continued, my voice rising with absolute, undeniable power. They did not tell you that Vivian forged my signature on federal banking documents, forcing me to drop out of university because I could no longer afford to eat, let alone pay for classes. I scrubbed pots in dirty diner kitchens and worked 80-hour weeks to keep a roof over my head while they paraded around Atlanta wearing my stolen inheritance. Gasps erupted from the front row. Several wealthy pastors' wives turned to look at Vivian with expressions of pure, unfiltered revulsion. Vivian shrank back into her chair, desperately shaking her head, but unable to speak a single word in her own defense. She looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of her false dignity. I pressed the button again. The screen flashed to a new set of highly classified financial documents. These were the internal banking records for DeAndre's holding company, the very firm he had just spent 20 minutes bragging about. The current balance, displayed in massive, bold red font, was negative $50,000. But the stolen tuition money was just the beginning. I declared, turning my cold gaze to DeAndre, who was now trembling violently beside me. DeAndre stood on this stage tonight and told you he is a visionary. He told you he is a brilliant real estate mogul who secured the most coveted land in the South. He told you he owns the West End district. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the stage, looking directly into the eyes of the panicked investors. He does not own a single blade of grass. I stated, my words landing like heavy hammer blows. That land belongs to my late mother, Camille Sterling. As the sole heir of the Sterling legacy, I possess total, absolute ownership of those 3 commercial blocks. DeAndre used forged authorization documents provided by my father to list my ancestral land as collateral for this fraudulent project. He has been selling you absolute air. The reaction was instantaneous and entirely explosive. The polite, wealthy restraint of the Atlanta elite completely evaporated. A prominent real estate investor in the second row jumped to his feet, his face purple with blinding rage. His veins were visibly bulging against his neck. "Are you telling us he does not hold the deeds?" the investor roared, pointing a shaking finger at DeAndre. "What about our money? We wired him millions of dollars this morning based on the absolute assurance from the church. I looked down at the angry investor, my expression completely devoid of pity. Your money is entirely, I answered truthfully. DeAndre used your life savings to pay off his mounting personal debts, buy custom designer suits, and keep his fake investment firm from collapsing. He promised you a massive return on a property he never had the legal right to touch. And as the rightful legal owner of the Sterling Trust, I am officially killing the West End Renaissance project right here and right now. Chaos completely erupted in the ballroom. People were shouting, pushing their chairs back, and demanding immediate answers. The wealthy deacons who had trusted their pastor's endorsement looked at Desmond with absolute homicidal fury. They realized they had been conned by their own spiritual leader. The very man who baptized their children had enthusiastically helped a ruthless scam artist drain their entire retirement accounts. They began marching aggressively toward the VIP table, their shouts drowning out the soft background music. DeAndre finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He lunged toward me, desperately reaching for the microphone, his face twisted in sheer blinding panic. "Zuri, stop," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "You do not understand what you are doing right now. You are going to permanently ruin all of us. Please just turn off the projector." I easily sidestepped his frantic, grasping hands. Two of my private security guards instantly materialized from the shadows, rushing the stage. They grabbed DeAndre by the shoulders and forcefully shoved him back, pinning him firmly against the heavy wooden podium. He struggled uselessly, his expensive suit wrinkling as he whimpered in absolute defeat. "I am not ruining you, DeAndre," I said, speaking directly into the microphone, so the entire enraged ballroom could hear his ultimate humiliation. "You ruined yourself completely. You built a fragile house of cards on a deep foundation of lies, and you actually thought I would let you use my name to save it. You are nothing but a common thief wearing an expensive watch." Kendra suddenly shrieked from the back of the crowded room. She was aggressively pushing her way through the angry crowd, tripping over the hem of her designer dress. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined by streaming tears of sheer panic. "This is incredibly illegal!" Kendra screamed, pointing frantically at the massive digital screen displaying their undeniable financial crimes. "You cannot simply show our private bank accounts to these people. We are going to sue you for defamation, Zuri. We will take everything you currently have and throw you back on the streets." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that easily cut through the shouting crowd. The furious investors parted, letting her stumble toward the front of the stage. She looked utterly deranged, completely stripped of all her high society elegance and fake poise. "You cannot sue me for defamation when I am presenting verified federal banking records," Kendra, I replied, looking down at her frantic, tear-stained face. "And you certainly cannot take everything I have because you are entirely bankrupt. Your credit cards declined yesterday because I froze your accounts. You do not even have enough money left to pay for the parking valet tonight. Your entire fake life is officially over." Kendra collapsed onto her knees right there on the plush ballroom carpet, sobbing uncontrollably into her trembling hands. The cherished golden child was finally completely broken. The grand ballroom doors suddenly banged open again. Several prominent local reporters and financial journalists, who had been explicitly invited by DeAndre to cover his victorious real estate announcement, were now furiously typing on their phones, capturing every single second of the spectacular meltdown. DeAndre had invited the press to document his monumental success, and instead, they were eagerly broadcasting his absolute destruction live to the entire city. I stood incredibly tall on the stage, watching the frantic, angry investors completely surround the VIP table, cornering my father and Vivian. The very people they had spent decades trying to impress were now screaming directly in their faces, demanding immediate financial restitution and threatening intense legal action. I calmly reached down and turned off the microphone, handing it smoothly to one of my security guards. The execution was entirely complete. Their false empire was permanently shattered beyond repair. I looked out over the chaotic sea of ruined reputations and shattered egos, feeling an overwhelming sense of profound peace. The heavy chains of my traumatic past were finally broken. I was no longer the discarded daughter hiding in the kitchen. I was the absolute master of my own immense destiny. But cornered animals are always the most dangerous, and my father was a man who had spent 30 years building his holy fortress. He was not going to let it burn to the ground without a final desperate fight. As the furious investors continued to swarm the VIP tables screaming at DeAndre and demanding their stolen money, Pastor Desmond violently shoved his way through the angry mob. He ignored his weeping wife and his panicked son-in-law. His eyes were completely bloodshot, locked onto me with a terrifying, unholy rage. He marched toward the stage, his heavy footsteps thudding against the wooden stairs. I did not retreat. I stood my ground watching him approach. He reached the podium and aggressively snatched the backup microphone from the stand, his knuckles completely white. "Please listen to me," Desmond bellowed into the microphone, his booming, charismatic voice completely drowning out the chaotic shouting in the grand ballroom. He raised his hands high in the air, instantly slipping back into the practiced authoritative role of the infallible spiritual leader. "Everyone, please remain calm and return to your seats. This is a massive misunderstanding. A deeply tragic family misunderstanding." The angry crowd of wealthy investors and church elders hesitated their shouts, lowering to harsh, confused murmurs. Desmond had commanded their absolute obedience for decades, and that deeply ingrained conditioning made them pause. He looked out at the audience, his face instantly transforming from furious panic into a mask of profound, heartbreaking paternal sorrow. He placed one hand over his chest, playing the victim perfectly. "My daughter Zuri is not well," Desmond announced, his voice echoing with fake heavy emotion. "I did not want to reveal our private family struggles to the world tonight, but she leaves me no choice. She has been severely mentally unwell for years. That is the real reason she dropped out of college. She suffered a total psychological breakdown. She has spent the last decade harboring deep, irrational delusions of grandeur, building a fantasy world where she is a wealthy heiress, just to cope with her own failures. These documents on the screen are entirely fabricated. They are the desperate digital lies of a sick, jealous woman trying to destroy her sister's happiness." The ballroom fell quiet again. Some of the older church members exchanged uncertain, sympathetic glances. Desmond was an absolute master manipulator. He knew exactly how to weaponize mental health to completely invalidate my truth. He was trying to gaslight hundreds of the smartest, wealthiest people in Atlanta, and for a terrifying second, it looked like it might actually work. He turned his sad, pitying gaze toward me, extending his hand as if he were trying to save a lost sheep. "Zuri, please stop this madness," Desmond pleaded publicly, making sure the reporters in the back of the room captured his fake compassion. "Come down from that stage right now. We will get you the psychiatric help you desperately need. We still love you, despite the horrible lies you are telling tonight." I looked at the man who had tormented me my entire life. I looked at the sheer, unadulterated evil masking itself as holy grace. I did not feel a single ounce of fear. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold executioner's resolve. I turned my head slightly and locked eyes with Maya, my brilliant forensic accountant standing at the media control booth. I gave her a sharp, definitive nod. "You are incredibly good at telling stories, Desmond," I said, projecting my voice clearly across the room without needing a microphone. My tone was lethal, cutting right through his fake paternal warmth. But numbers do not suffer from delusions, and numbers absolutely never lie. Maya hit the enter key on her encrypted laptop. The massive digital projector screen behind me flashed brightly, instantly replacing the sterling trust deeds with a completely new set of highly classified financial documents. These were not personal banking statements. These were massive, incredibly complex institutional ledgers bearing the official watermarks of the megachurch. The crowd gasped as highlighted rows of massive monetary deposits illuminated the dark stage. The numbers were staggering, millions of dollars moving in rapid sequential transfers. I stepped forward, forcing Desmond to shrink back slightly from my intense, unwavering gaze. "You told these people that DeAndre's holding company was backed by my family legacy," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. But DeAndre's fake firm had absolutely no legitimate revenue. So how was he paying for the luxury cars, the designer suits, and the lavish lifestyle he used to trick you all into investing? I pointed directly at this massive screen behind me. "He was using the church. How was using the sacred tax-exempt offering accounts funded by the hard-working people in this very room? Desmond's jaw dropped. The fake, pitying sadness vanished from his face, instantly replaced by sheer, unmasked terror. He lunged toward the media booth to try and rip the cables out, but Vance, my ruthless corporate attorney, effortlessly stepped in his path, forcing Desmond to freeze. "Look at the screen," I instructed the horrified crowd. DeAndre was taking the initial deposit money he stole from private investors and wiring it directly into the church's tax-exempt building fund. Your beloved pastor then quietly transferred those untraceable tax-free millions into offshore shell accounts registered in the Cayman Islands. They were washing stolen investor money through the holy collection plate to dodge federal taxes and hide the fraud from the government. The outrage that erupted from the crowd this time was absolutely deafening. The wealthy church deacons, the men who had trusted Desmond with their spiritual lives and their financial donations, stared at the screen in pure, visceral disgust. They saw the exact dates and the exact dollar amounts. They realized their sacred institution was nothing but a criminal laundromat for a cheap con artist. "You are not a man of God, Desmond," I declared, my voice ringing out like a final devastating judgment. "You are a common money launderer hiding behind a velvet suit and a pulpit. You stole from your own congregation to fund your fake royal lifestyle." "That is a complete lie," Desmond screamed into his microphone, his voice cracking with sheer panic. The audio feedback shrieked horribly through the speakers. "These documents are fake. I am a man of God. I am protected by the blood." "You are protected by absolutely nothing," I replied coldly, stepping right into his personal space. "Because this morning my legal team officially handed these exact financial records over to the federal government. The Internal Revenue Service initiated a massive zero-warning audit on your church accounts at 9 o'clock today. The IRS audit I triggered this morning completely agrees with me. By tomorrow afternoon, your precious megachurch will be surrounded by federal agents seizing every single hard drive in the building." The heavy microphone slipped from Desmond's trembling hand and crashed onto the wooden stage. He stumbled backward, clutching his chest, as if he were having a physical heart attack. The charismatic, untouchable pastor was completely gone. He was nothing but a terrified, exposed criminal waiting for the federal authorities to lock him away for the rest of his natural life. While Desmond collapsed in on himself, a sudden blood-curdling shriek pierced through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. I looked past my father and saw Kendra aggressively pushing her way through the front row of enraged investors. She was completely feral. Her flawless pageant queen facade had entirely dissolved into sheer unhinged madness. Her expensive emerald green gown, the one she bought on my stolen credit, was torn at the hem. Her makeup was a disastrous, smeared mess of black mascara and ruined lipstick. She had just watched her husband face decades in federal prison. She had just watched her father's holy empire get instantly dismantled by the IRS. She realized that her entire identity, her wealth, her social status, and her arrogant superiority were completely erased. She had absolutely nothing left, and her fragile, narcissistic mind simply could not process the total destruction. "You ruined my entire life," Kendra screamed, her voice tearing at the vocal cords. "You ugly, jealous, pathetic caterer. I am going to kill you." Kendra kicked off her designer heels and lunged violently toward the stage. She scrambled up the wooden steps like a rabid animal, her manicured hands hooked into claws aiming directly for my face. She wanted to physically rip the composure right off me. She wanted to drag me down to the floor and beat me into the submissive, broken sister she had bullied for 28 years. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply stood there, my posture perfectly straight, my expression completely bored, as if watching a toddler throw a desperate tantrum. Before Kendra could even cross the distance of the stage, before she could land a single desperate scratch on my flawless haute couture gown, my private security team moved with terrifying professional speed. Two massive, heavily muscled private security guards intercepted her in a fraction of a second. They grabbed her flailing arms, cleanly twisting them behind her back, while simultaneously forcing her down. In one smooth, deeply humiliating motion, they pinned my furious sister face down onto the plush carpet of the stage. Kendra writhed helplessly against the floor, her expensive silk dress twisting and tearing around her legs. She kicked and screamed, spitting out venomous, unintelligible curses. The entire ballroom, the politicians, the wealthy socialites, and her former elite sorority friends stood absolutely paralyzed, watching the highly coveted golden child of Atlanta high society get pinned to the ground like a common street criminal. I slowly walked over to where she was pinned, looking down at her ruined, tear-stained face, pressed harshly against the stage floor. I leaned in incredibly close to her ear, making sure that only she could hear my absolute final promise to her totally shattered, broken ego. I leaned down over my sister. Her tear-stained face was pressed hard against the wooden stage. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure my words cut straight through to her soul. "You told me to learn my place, Kendra," I whispered coldly. "Now you are going to learn yours." I signaled to my security team. They immediately hauled Kendra to her feet, releasing her arms, but stepping solidly between her and me. She stumbled backward, tripping over the shredded hem of her custom emerald gown. She looked frantically toward our father for help, but Desmond was still slumped against the podium, gasping for air, as the reality of his impending federal indictment crushed the remaining life out of his fake holy empire. The grand ballroom was buzzing with a lethal combination of shock and sheer vindictive outrage. The wealthy investors who had eagerly dressed in their finest tuxedos and evening gowns to attend this elite gala were now practically foaming at the mouth. They wanted blood, they wanted their stolen money back, and they wanted the people responsible to suffer. I stepped back to the center of the stage, fully reclaiming my space. My lead corporate attorney and Maya, my forensic accountant, moved seamlessly to my side. The attorney unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled out 3 thick, heavy legal envelopes sealed with bright red tape. He did not hand them to me. He walked directly off the front of the stage and approached the VIP table where Vivian and DeAndre were cowering. DeAndre was sweating profusely. He had completely lost his arrogant finance broker persona. He looked like a cornered rat trapped in a cage of his own making. The attorney dropped the first heavy envelope squarely onto DeAndre's chest. The second envelope went to Desmond. The third was placed right in front of Vivian's shaking hands. "What is this?" DeAndre choked out, his voice trembling violently, as the heavy envelope slid down his suit jacket and hit the floor. "That is a notice of immediate foreclosure," the attorney stated, his voice echoing clearly for the surrounding furious investors to hear. "As Zuri just proved, you used fraudulent deeds to secure your massive business loans. You also used your sprawling pastoral estate as secondary collateral to keep your fake investment firm afloat. Since the primary collateral was completely fabricated, and the accounts are now permanently frozen by federal authorities, the bank has officially called in the entire debt." Vivian gasped, staring down at the thick envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "We own our home. The church paid for that estate." "The church paid for nothing," Vivian I interrupted, stepping to the very edge of the stage to look down at her. "You and Desmond used my stolen inheritance to buy that mansion. You funneled the money through the church tax-exempt accounts to hide the purchase. DeAndre then secretly leveraged the equity in your house to pay for his designer suits and luxury cars." I paused, letting the absolute devastation wash over them. "Because the loan is in default, and the assets are locked, pending a massive federal fraud investigation, the bank has seized the property." I looked directly into Vivian's terrified eyes. "You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises." DeAndre shook his head wildly, backing away from the table. "No," he stammered. "No, you cannot do this. We have tenant rights. We have legal protections. You cannot just throw us out on the street by tomorrow night. You forfeited your legal protections the exact second you committed federal wire fraud," DeAndre, my attorney, replied smoothly. "The authorities will be waiting at the gates of your estate tomorrow evening. If you or your family members are still on the property after the deadline, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. I highly suggest you start packing your bags immediately." The reality of the situation finally hit Vivian with the force of a speeding train. The wealthy, untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was officially homeless. The sprawling mansion where she hosted her elite charity luncheons, where she paraded her stolen wealth, where she forced me to sleep in a cramped, freezing basement room, was entirely gone. Vivian let out a guttural, desperate sob. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the plush carpet of the ballroom floor. The heavy diamond necklace she wore sparkled mockingly under the crystal chandeliers. She crawled forward, her silver evening gown dragging across the floor until she reached the edge of the stage. "Zuri, please." Vivian wailed, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. She reached up and desperately grabbed the hem of my emerald green haute couture gown. Her knuckles were white as she clung to the silk fabric. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot put us on the street. We are your family." The wealthy guests standing nearby watched the pathetic display with pure, unadulterated disgust. The women who had smiled at Vivian just an hour ago were now looking at her like she was an absolute monster. I looked down at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I looked at the woman who had stolen my tuition money to buy Kendra a luxury car. I looked at the woman who had constantly told me I was a useless burden, a failure, a peasant who should be grateful for the scraps falling from her table. "We raised you," Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking as she tried to pull me down to her level. "We fed you when you had nothing. We gave you a home. You have $40 million, Zuri. You have the entire Sterling Empire. You do not need that house. Please just let us keep the house. I am begging you." The sheer audacity of her plea was staggering. She was not apologizing for stealing my identity. She was not apologizing for the years of horrific emotional abuse. She was only apologizing because she had finally been caught, and she was utterly terrified of losing her fake wealthy status. I did not pull my dress away from her grasping hands. I simply stood incredibly tall, looking down at her kneeling form with absolute freezing ice in my veins. "You did not raise me, Vivian," I said, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through her pathetic sobbing. "You held me captive. You used my own stolen money to feed me cheap scraps while you dined on caviar. You forced me to wash dishes and scrub floors, to pay for a college education you had already robbed me of." I leaned down slightly, bringing my face closer to hers. "You gave me a prison while you lived in my castle." I whispered the words, hitting her like physical blows. "And now it is time to pay rent." I forcefully yanked the hem of my dress out of her desperate grip. Vivian let out a loud, tragic wail, slumping forward onto the floor. She was completely broken, stripped of her pride, her wealth, and her fake holy reputation. I turned my back on her entirely. I did not look at Desmond, who was still clutching his chest in sheer terror. I did not look at DeAndre, who was frantically trying to call his non-existent wealthy friends for a bailout. I did not look at Kendra, who was sitting on the floor sobbing into her ruined designer dress. They were absolutely nothing to me now. They were just ghosts of a toxic past I had officially conquered. I signaled to Maya and my lead attorney. We walked together down the short wooden steps of the stage, bypassing the ruined VIP table completely. I stepped into the center aisle of the grand ballroom, keeping my head held high, my posture radiating pure, undeniable authority. The massive crowd of angry investors, politicians, and high society elites immediately parted for me. They stepped back, creating a wide, clear path toward the exit. No one said a word to me. No one dared to block my way. They simply watched me with expressions of profound, absolute respect. As I walked down the aisle, I could hear the aggressive shouting starting up again behind me. The wealthy church deacons had finally recovered from their shock and were completely surrounding Desmond, Vivian, and DeAndre. They were demanding their stolen money, promising brutal legal action, and screaming about the sheer betrayal of their spiritual trust. I did not stop to watch the carnage. I did not need to. The execution was complete. The false empire had been utterly destroyed, and the ashes were being swept away by the very people my family had lied to impress. I reached the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom, completely ready to finally start living my beautiful, truly victorious, and incredibly free new life. The crisp night air hit my face the second I stepped out of the Grand Hotel and into the waiting town car, leaving them behind forever. Exactly 48 hours later, I stood on the expansive wrap-around balcony of my brand-new luxury penthouse, located straight in the absolute heart of Midtown Atlanta. The glorious morning sun was casting a brilliant golden glow over the entire sprawling city skyline. I leaned comfortably against the cold glass railing, holding a steaming cup of dark roast coffee, wrapped snugly in a thick, beautiful silk robe. The absolute silence of my new home was a profound luxury I had never experienced before. There were no harsh demands, no cruel criticisms, and no fake performances required. I was simply breathing in my own success. My burner phone resting on the patio table suddenly began to vibrate violently. The caller ID flashed a number I recognized instantly. It was Vivian. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the phone vibrate a few more times before I finally answered. I pressed the phone to my ear without saying a single word. "Zuri, please, you have to come back home to us right now." Vivian screamed wildly into the receiver, her trembling voice completely unrecognizable and broken. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated terror. "We need you." DeAndre took whatever liquid cash was left in the house safe and completely fled the state. He abandoned Kendra in the middle of the night, and the federal FBI agents are literally standing right at the massive front door, looking for your father. They are swarming the entire estate. "Zuri, please, you have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left." I listened to her desperate sobbing, the sound of heavy pounding echoing in the background of the call. I looked out over the beautiful city my mother had left to me. I took another slow, elegant sip of my hot coffee. "I told you I was cutting off the catering, Vivian," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, freezing whisper. "Enjoy the mess you made." I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I popped open the back of the device, pulled out the tiny plastic SIM card, and casually dropped it directly into my hot coffee. I watched it sink to the bottom permanently, severing the final toxic cord to my past. The inevitable fallout over the next several months was swift, absolutely brutal, and entirely public. Desmond was formally indicted on multiple federal charges of money laundering and wire fraud. The church board immediately stripped him of his pastoral title, erasing his holy legacy overnight. He traded his custom velvet tuxedos for a federal prison jumpsuit. Kendra's arrogant elite facade was completely obliterated. Because her signature was on several of DeAndre's fraudulent business documents, she was hit with massive conspiracy charges. Her wealthy sorority friends entirely abandoned her, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. The former pageant queen was forced to take a minimum wage job scrubbing floors at a local retail store just to afford her mounting legal fees. Vivian lost everything she had ever cared about. Stripped completely of her stolen wealth and her precious high society status, she was forcefully evicted and forced to move into a tiny, rundown, dirty motel on the far outskirts of the city. She spent her days entirely alone, trapped in a cheap room, a permanent prisoner of her own spectacular greed. They had tried to bury me in the dark, but they ended up digging their own inescapable graves. As they faced their ultimate destruction, I stepped fully into the brilliant light of my reclaimed legacy. The very first thing I did was hire a judge to officially change my last name back to Sterling. I shed the name of the man who had tormented me, and proudly took up the mantle of the mother who had loved me enough to secure my future. I did not just keep the wealth to myself. I used a significant portion of my massive trust fund to build something truly meaningful. 1 year after the gala, I stood proudly on the historic campus of Clark Atlanta University. I was wearing a stunning tailored white suit, holding a pair of oversized golden scissors. I cut the thick red ribbon officially opening the Camille Sterling Academy of Culinary Arts and Business. It was a massive state-of-the-art facility fully funded by my trust, dedicated entirely to providing full-ride scholarships for young, brilliant Black women who had to work multiple jobs just to survive. I looked out at the cheering crowd of students and faculty. Standing right in the front row, beaming with absolute pride, was Aunt Valerie. She was no longer a hidden ghost of our family past. She was my trusted advisor, my confidant, and the closest thing to a real mother I had ever known. Maya, My forensic accountant and the rest of my loyal legal team stood beside her, clapping enthusiastically. I had completely surrounded myself with wonderful, real, authentic friends who valued my mind and my heart, and not just my bank account. I looked up at the bright blue Atlanta sky, feeling a profound, unbreakable sense of peace settling deep into my soul. They had spent my entire life trying to convince me that I was a failure, an ugly college dropout destined to serve them forever. They wanted me to believe that my worth was defined by their cruel conditional approval. But standing there watching a new generation of women walk through the doors of an academy bearing my real mother's name, I knew the absolute truth. The ultimate sweetest revenge is not just destroying the people who tried to break you. The greatest true revenge is a life beautifully lived, completely free, and entirely your very own. I smiled, walking toward the bright horizon, knowing I had finally won the ultimate war forever.